I didn't notice it at first. Not because it wasn't there, but because it didn't happen all at once. It started small, quiet decisions, little things that didn't seem important enough to question, at least not at the moment. After my husband passed, everything felt different. The house was the same, the routine was the same, but something underneath it had shifted, and I couldn't explain it yet. People came and went those first few days. Family, friends, neighbors. Everyone speaks softly, moving carefully, offering help. And in the middle of all of that, my son stepped in. At first, it felt natural. He handled the calls. I spoke to people I didn't have the strength to speak to, answered questions before they reached me, and I let him, because at that moment, I trusted him. He wasn't just my son. He was someone trying to carry weight I couldn't hold, or at least that's what I believed. But then, things started changing. Not loudly, not in a way that would make you stop and say something immediately, just quietly. I remember the first time I noticed it. I was sitting in the living room, the same chair I had sat in for years, the same place where everything had always felt familiar, and he walked in, holding a folder, not papers, not loose documents, a folder, organized, prepared, like something had already been decided. "I've started putting things together," he said. His voice was calm, steady, like he had already thought through everything. I nodded slowly. I didn't ask what things meant. I assumed it was just arrangements, details, things that needed to be handled. But then he sat down, across from me, not beside me, across, and that's when it felt different, subtle, but different. "There are a few things we need to take care of," he continued. "We." That word stayed with me, because for years, decisions in that house had always been something we handled together, me and my husband. Now, suddenly, it was me and him, and I hadn't realized when that shift happened. I listened as he spoke. Bank accounts, bills, property details, legal matters, all the things that come after someone passes. But the way he said it, it didn't feel like he was helping. It felt like he was leading, and I told myself, that's okay, he's stepping up, he's trying to help. That's what I wanted to believe, because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to face. Over the next few days, it continued. Small changes, but consistent ones. He started answering questions before I could think, making decisions before I had time to think, speaking on my behalf without asking. At first, I thought it was just urgency. Things needed to be handled quickly. People expected answers. But then I started noticing something else. People weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at him, asking him, waiting for him, and I was still there, still present, but somehow no longer the center of my own situation. I remember one afternoon clearly. Someone asked a question about the house, a simple question, and before I could respond, he answered. Confidence, final, like it was already decided. I turned my head slightly. I looked at him, not confused, not yet, just aware, because that wasn't how things used to work, and for the first time, a thought crossed my mind, not loud, not fully formed, but clear enough to feel. When did he take control? I didn't say it out loud. I didn't challenge anything.
Not yet, because part of me still believed this was temporary, that once things settled, everything would go back to normal. But something in me knew that wasn't true, because control doesn't just appear, it builds quietly, step by step, until one day you realize it's no longer yours, and by then it's already been taken. At first, I told myself it was just grief, that everything felt different because everything was different, that I was noticing things that weren't really there. But the feeling didn't go away, it stayed, and the more I paid attention, the clearer it became. It wasn't just what he was doing, it was how he was doing it. The way he spoke, the way he moved, the way decisions were already made before I even heard about them. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and found him on the phone. His voice was low and controlled, serious, and he didn't see me at first. "Yes, I've already handled that," he said, followed by a brief pause, then, "No, she doesn't need to worry about it." She. I stopped just short of the doorway. He wasn't talking to me, but he was talking about me. I didn't interrupt or make a sound, I just stood there listening. "I'll take care of everything," he continued, then after another brief pause, "Yes, that's already been decided." Decided? That word didn't sit right, because I didn't remember making any decisions. He turned slightly and saw me, and for a brief moment his expression shifted, then it returned to normal. "I'll call you back," he said, quickly, ending the call. The room felt different after that, quieter, but not in a comfortable way. "What was that about?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and neutral. He placed the phone down like nothing had happened. "Just handling some things," he replied. "Simple. Too simple." "What things?" I asked. He hesitated, not long, but long enough. "Just paperwork," he said. "Nothing you need to worry about." There it was again, that sentence, "nothing you need to worry about." I nodded slowly, but inside something tightened, because that wasn't reassurance, that was dismissal, and I felt it clearly this time. I moved past him and poured myself a glass of water, keeping my movements steady and controlled, but my mind wasn't steady anymore, because now it wasn't just a feeling, it was a pattern. He was deciding things, handling things, and closing things without me. Later that afternoon, I noticed something else. The mail had already been opened and stacked neatly on the table. I hadn't opened it, I hadn't even seen it come in, but it was already sorted and handled. I picked up one of the envelopes, a bank statement that had already been reviewed. I didn't need to ask, I already knew he had gone through it. I set it back down carefully, not reacting, not yet, because I was starting to understand something. This wasn't about helping anymore, this was about control. And control doesn't ask, it assumes. That evening, a relative stopped by, someone who had known us for years. We sat in the living room talking quietly, and then the conversation shifted. "To be honest, your son has been handling everything really well." I gave a small nod, polite, expected. "He's been very clear about what's happening with the house." "The house?" I looked up slightly. "What do you mean?" I asked. They paused briefly, then smiled. "Oh, I just meant he seems to have everything organized." Organized. That word again.
But this time, it came with something else. A feeling I couldn't ignore anymore. Because this wasn't just inside the house, this was outside too. He wasn't just taking control, he was presenting himself as the one in control, to everyone. I sat back slowly, letting the conversation move on, but I wasn't really listening anymore, because one question had started to form, clearer now, stronger. What exactly has he been telling people? That night I didn't sleep much, not because I was emotional, because I was thinking, replaying every conversation, every moment, every small change I had brushed aside. And for the first time, I stopped telling myself it was nothing, because it wasn't nothing. It was a building right in front of me. and somehow I was the last one to see it. The next morning started like any other, quiet, still, the kind of quiet that settles into a house after everything changes. I woke up early, not because I wanted to, but because my mind wouldn't rest. Something didn't feel right, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I got up slowly and walked down the hallway, letting the silence guide me. That's when I noticed it. His door was open, lights on, voices, low, but not low enough. I stopped just outside, not intentionally, just listening. "We should move forward before she starts asking questions," he said. My chest tightened. Before she starts asking questions. There was someone else on the call. I couldn't hear their voices clearly, just his, controlled, certain. "It's easier this way," he continued. A pause. "No, she doesn't know yet." "Know what?" I didn't move. I didn't breathe any louder than I had to, because something in that moment told me, whatever this was, I wasn't supposed to hear it. "Once everything is finalized, it won't matter," he added. Finalized. That word again. But this time, it hit differently. He wasn't talking about small things anymore. This was something bigger, something already in motion. I stepped back quietly before he could see me, moved down the hallway like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just heard something I couldn't explain, but couldn't ignore. I went into the kitchen and stood there for a moment, hands resting lightly on the counter, still, processing. Because now it wasn't just a feeling, it wasn't just behavior, it was my intention, clear enough to recognize, but not clear enough to understand, and that made it worse. A few minutes later, he walked in, phone gone, expression calm, like nothing had happened. "Morning," he said. I turned toward him slowly. "Morning," I replied, and for the first time, I looked at him differently, not just as my son, but as someone I didn't fully understand anymore. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked. I nodded. I did. It wasn't a lie, it just wasn't the full truth, because sleep wasn't the problem, understanding was. He moved around the kitchen like everything was normal, pouring coffee, checking his phone, avoiding nothing. Because of him, there was nothing to avoid. That's when I decided something. I wasn't going to confront him yet, not without knowing what I was dealing with, because asking too early would only make him careful, and I needed him to stay comfortable, unaware, so I could see what this really was. Later that day, I found something else. Not hidden, just placed where I wasn't supposed to question it. Documents, neatly stacked on the dining table. Folders again, the same kind he had before. Organized, prepared. I walked over slowly. I looked down at the papers in front of me. Property documents, bank information, legal forms, everything laid out in a way that felt deliberate. Then I saw it, a signature line, not filled but clearly marked, prepared, ready. I stared at it for a moment because something about that line felt final, like a step that couldn't be undone once taken. And I hadn't agreed to anything, I hadn't signed anything, so why was it already prepared? I heard his footsteps behind me, steady and unhurried, and I didn't turn around right away. I just kept looking at the papers, taking in what I could without making it obvious. "What's that?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and simple. He stepped closer, a little too close. "It's just paperwork," he said. That same answer again. I nodded slowly, but this time I didn't let it settle. What for? I asked. He paused slightly, then reached forward and closed the folder in one smooth, controlled motion. It's just things that need to be handled, he said. It was vague, careful, intentional. I stepped back slightly, giving space but not backing down. Before or after I see them? I asked. That changed something. Not his words, but his expression. It tightened just enough to notice. They're nothing you need to worry about right now, he said. Right now. That choice of words stayed with me because it meant something was already in motion, something I wasn't being included in, something moving forward without me. I looked at him more carefully this time, and for the first time I didn't feel confused. I felt aware, because I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't about helping me, this was about moving ahead of me, and whatever he was doing wasn't small, it was planned. By that evening, I could feel something coming. I didn't know exactly what, but the way he moved through the house, the way everything felt prepared, made it clear that a conversation had already been decided before it even started. We were sitting in the living room, the same space that once felt familiar, but now it felt different, controlled. He walked in with the same folder again and set it down on the table. Carefully, not casually, like it mattered. I need to go over something with you, he said. His tone was calm and measured, not emotional, and that was the first thing that didn't sit right, because nothing about this situation should have felt routine. I nodded slowly. All right, I said. He sat across from me again, not beside me, but across, just like before, and that distance meant something now. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. These are documents related to the house, he said. The house. I looked down at the papers, then back at him. What about it? I asked. He didn't hesitate this time. We need to move forward with transferring things, he said. The words sounded simple, but they carried weight. What things? I asked, even though I already knew. He held my gaze. The property, he said, clear and direct with no softness around it. For a second, I didn't respond. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did, and I needed to make sure I heard it right. You mean the house? I said. He nodded. Yes, just like that. No explanation, no build-up, just a decision. I leaned back slightly, let the moment settle. Because this wasn't a suggestion, this wasn't a discussion, this was something he had already decided. When was that decided? I asked, my voice steady, not raised, not emotional, just clear. He paused, not long, but long enough. It's just the best way to handle things right now, he said. That wasn't an answer, that was avoidance. I looked at the papers again, then back at him. And who decided that? I asked. This time the pause was longer, because now the question wasn't about the situation, it was about control. He said we talked about it. We, that word again, but this time it didn't include me, because I hadn't been part of any conversation. I felt it clearly now, that shift, that line, the moment where helping turned into taking. I wasn't part of that, I said, still calm, but firm. He leaned forward slightly, like he was trying to explain something simple. You don't need to worry about the details, he said. I'm just trying to make things easier. Easier? For who? Because nothing about this felt easier, it felt final. I closed the folder gently, not abruptly, not aggressively, just enough to stop the moment from moving forward. I'm not signing anything, I said. There it was, clear, simple, and for the first time, direct. The room shifted,
Not physically, but the energy did. Because now, this wasn't quiet anymore. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. Enough to show he wasn't expecting that. He wasn't expecting me to say no. "This isn't something you should delay," he said. And there it was. Pressure. Controlled, but present. I held his gaze. "I'm not delaying anything," I replied. "I'm deciding." That landed, because now the control wasn't one-sided anymore. He sat back slightly, studying me, recalculating, because something had changed. I wasn't just listening anymore. I wasn't just allowing things to happen. I was paying attention, and more importantly, I was questioning. The silence between us stretched for a moment, but this time it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt clear, because I understood something now. Whatever he was doing, it wasn't temporary. This wasn't about helping me through something. This was about moving me out of the way, step by step, decision by decision, until there was nothing left for me to say. But he had moved too fast, because now I was aware. And once you see something clearly, you can't go back to not seeing it. I pushed the folder back to him, slowly, deliberately. "We're not doing anything until I understand everything," I said. And this time, there was no hesitation in my voice, because whatever this was, it had just crossed a line, and I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. That night, the house felt different. Not quiet, not peaceful, just heavy, like something had settled into the walls without being spoken. I sat alone in the living room for a while after he went to his room.
The folder was gone, but the conversation stayed, clear, unfinished. I leaned back in my chair and looked around the room. Everything was still where it had always been. The same furniture, the same pictures, the same small details that had built a life over the years. But the meaning behind it felt different now. Because for the first time, I wasn't looking at it as something we shared. I was looking at it as something someone else was trying to take control of. And that thought didn't sit quietly. It stayed. I stood up slowly and walked toward the hallway, not thinking too much about where I was going, just moving. Then I stopped in front of the bedroom door. Ours. I hadn't gone in there much since he passed, not because I couldn't, because I wasn't ready. But something about that moment made me open it. The room was still, undisturbed, like time had paused inside it. I stepped in slowly and looked around. Everything was where he left it. His side of the bed, his shoes near the corner, his jacket was still hanging where it always was. I walked over and ran my hand lightly across the dresser, then opened the top drawer, not searching, just remembering. That's when I saw it. A small envelope tucked neatly under a stack of papers, not hidden, but not obvious either. I picked it up slowly. I turned it over. My name, written in his handwriting. That alone was enough to stop me for a moment, because he didn't leave things unfinished. He didn't leave things unclear. If something mattered, he made sure it was understood. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper. I sat down on the edge of the bed before opening it, and then I read. It wasn't long, but it didn't need to be. He had written clearly, directly, like he always did. There were details, important ones, about the house, about the accounts, about decisions that had already been made, together, before anything happened, before everything changed. And one line stayed with me, clearer than the rest. Make sure everything stays in your hands until you decide otherwise. I read it again, slower this time, because now everything started connecting. The folder, the conversations, the way my son had been moving ahead of me. This wasn't just about handling things. This was about changing something that had already been decided, something that wasn't his to change. I folded the paper carefully and held it in my hands for a moment, because now this wasn't just a feeling anymore. It wasn't just suspicion, it was direction, clear, given, and meant for me. I stood up slowly and looked around the room again, but this time I wasn't looking at it the same way. I wasn't remembering, I was understanding. Because my husband had seen something, or maybe he had just prepared for something. Either way, he had left me with one thing: clarity. And now that I have it, I couldn't ignore what was happening. I couldn't pretend this was just help, because it wasn't. This was control, and it was moving fast, but not fast enough, because now I knew something my son didn't. I wasn't unprepared, I wasn't unaware, and more importantly, I wasn't alone in this decision. I looked down at the letter one more time, then folded it and placed it back in the envelope, carefully, because it did. I turned off the light and walked out of the room, closing the door behind me. And as I stepped back into the hallway, one thought stayed clear in my mind. This wasn't over, not even close, because whatever he thought he was doing, he hadn't expected me to see it this way, and he definitely hadn't expected what I was going to do next. The next morning, I didn't rush anything. I didn't confront him. I didn't mention the letter. I moved the same way I always had, calm, steady, like nothing had changed. Because the moment you reveal what you know, you lose the advantage of knowing it, and I wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. I walked into the kitchen and found him already there, coffee made, phone in his hand, moving through the morning like everything was under control. "Morning," he said. I nodded. Morning. Simple, normal. But this time, I wasn't just responding, I was observing. Every movement, every word, every decision he made without asking, because now I knew what to look for. And once you know that, things become clearer. "I'll be heading out later," he said, glancing at his phone. "There are a few things I need to finalize." Finalize, that word again. But this time, it didn't catch me off guard. It confirmed what I already knew. "What things?" I asked. Not confrontational, just direct. He didn't look up immediately. "Just paperwork," he said. Same answer, different moments. I nodded slowly. "Good," I replied. "I'd like to come with you." That was new. That hadn't been part of the pattern, and it showed. He looked up, really looked this time. For a second, he didn't respond. Then he adjusted. "You don't need to worry about that," he said. There it was again, that same line, that same attempt to keep distance. But this time, it didn't land the same. "I'm not worried," I said calmly. "I'm involved." That changed the tone, not loudly, but enough. Because now I wasn't just present, I was inserting myself back into something he had already started moving without me. He set his phone down slowly, like he was reconsidering something. "It's just easier if I handle it," he said. Easier. I held his gaze. "Easier doesn't mean right," I replied. No emotion, just the truth.
The space between us shifted again. But this time, it didn't feel uncertain. It felt balanced, because for the first time, he wasn't the only one controlling the direction. He leaned back slightly, thinking, recalculating, because now the situation has changed. I wasn't behind it anymore. I was in it. "We can go together later," he said finally. There it was. Adjustment. Not agreement, but movement. And that was enough. For now. Later that day, I made another decision. Quiet, but important. I gathered the documents I had seen before. Not all of them, just enough. Enough to understand. Enough to confirm. And as I went through them, line by line, detail by detail, one thing became clear. This wasn't rushed. This wasn't emotional. This was structured, planned, steps laid out in advance, and I hadn't been part of any of it. I sat there for a while, papers spread in front of me, taking it all in. Because now I wasn't just reacting. I was preparing for what was coming next.
Because something else was clear, too. This wasn't going to stay quiet. At some point, this was going to be said out loud. Decisions would be announced, positions would be taken, and when that moment came, I needed to be ready. Not emotional, not surprised. Ready. That evening, he came back, calm, collected, like everything had gone according to plan. But something was different now. He looked at me more carefully, more aware, because he had felt the shift too. Not fully, but enough. We sat across from each other again. Same positions, same room. But this time, it wasn't the same dynamic, because now I wasn't waiting to hear what he had decided. I was waiting to see how far he was willing to go, and more importantly, how far I was going to let him. I folded my hands in my lap and looked at him steadily, and for the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel uncertain. I felt prepared, because whatever came next, I wasn't going to be caught off guard. Not again. That evening, I didn't wait for him to start. I didn't wait for another folder, another explanation, another decision already made without me. I sat in the living room before he came in, calm, still, ready. When he walked through the door, he paused for a second, not because anything looked different, but because something felt different. He could sense it. "You're still up," he said. "I've been waiting," I replied. Simple, clear. He set his keys down slowly, took a few steps into the room, watching me now, carefully. "For what?" he asked. There it was, the opening. "For a real conversation," I said. Not emotional, not raised, just direct. He didn't sit right away. He stood there for a moment, then walked over and took the same seat across from me. Same position, but this time it didn't feel like control. It felt like confrontation. "What do you want to talk about?" he asked. I held his gaze, not aggressively, not softly, just steady. "The house," I said. That was enough. I saw it immediately. That small shift in his expression, the one he couldn't hide fast enough, because now we weren't circling around it anymore. We were in it. "I told you we're handling that," he said. Still controlled, still measured, but tighter now. "No," I replied. "You're handling it." That landed, because it was true, and there was no way to soften it. He leaned forward slightly, like he was trying to bring the conversation back under control. "I'm doing what needs to be done," he said. "For who?" I asked. That stopped him, not completely, but enough, because now the question wasn't about action, it was about intention. "For both of us," he said. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said, "not for me." The room went quiet, but this wasn't the same kind of silence. This wasn't avoidance. This was pressure, because now everything was out in the open. I reached beside me and picked up the envelope, the one I hadn't shown him, the one he didn't know I had seen. I held it in my hand for a moment, then placed it on the table between us. His eyes dropped to it, then back to me. "What's that?" he asked. "My answer," I said. That shifted everything. Because now, this wasn't just a conversation. This was the direction. I opened the envelope slowly, took out the paper, and placed it flat on the table. "I found this," I said. His eyes moved across the page, reading, processing, and for the first time since all of this started, he didn't speak right away. Because this wasn't something he expected. This was written before anything changed, I continued, before any of these decisions you've been making. He looked up at me. "It's different now. Not controlled, not certain, aware. This house, everything connected to it, was already decided," I said, my voice steady, firm, clear. "And none of that included you taking control of it." There it was, the line, drawn, no confusion, no guessing, just the truth. He leaned back slowly, like he needed space to think, to adjust, because now he wasn't ahead anymore, he was catching up. "I was trying to make things easier," he said again, but this time it didn't sound the same, because now it didn't hold. "Easier for who?" I asked, again, but this time he didn't answer, because there wasn't one. I leaned forward slightly, not aggressive, but present. "This isn't about helping me," I said. "This is about you moving ahead of me." That landed, because now there was no room left to avoid it. He looked away for a moment, then back at me, and in that moment I saw it clearly. Not control, not certainty, something else, pressure. Because now he knew I wasn't behind anymore, I wasn't unaware, and I wasn't going to stay quiet. The space between us held, tight, unresolved, but clear, because whatever came next wasn't going to be decided by him alone, not anymore. For a moment, neither of us spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been said. The paper was still on the table between us, clear, undeniable, and for the first time since all of this started, he didn't try to take control of the moment. He sat there, looking at it, thinking, calculating, trying to find a way to move around something that couldn't be moved. "You went through his things?" he asked finally, not angry, not accusing, just searching. "I didn't have to go through anything," I replied. "It was left for me." That mattered, because this wasn't something I found by accident. It was something meant to be found, and he knew it. He leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly, like the weight of it had finally caught up. "I was just trying to make sure everything was handled," he said, but this time there was no confidence behind it, because now the structure he had been building was exposed. "You weren't handling it, you were changing it." That landed, clear, direct, and impossible to avoid. His eyes moved back to the paper, then to me, and for the first time he didn't have an immediate response, because the truth had shifted the ground under him. Everything he had been doing, every decision,
Every conversation was now standing against something solid, something already decided, something that didn't include him. "I thought," he started, then stopped.
Because whatever he thought was no longer enough. I let the moment settle without rushing it or forcing it, just allowing it to land where it needed to, because this wasn't about getting to the end quickly. It was about making everything clear. "You didn't think I would question it," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "You thought I would just let it happen." That was the truth, not harsh or exaggerated, just accurate. He looked at me, really looked this time, and whatever he saw, it wasn't the same person he had been making decisions around, because I was no longer uncertain, no longer quiet, and no longer behind. "I wasn't trying to take anything from you," he said. But even as he said it, it didn't hold, because intention doesn't matter when actions say something else. "I already were," I replied, with no emotion, just clarity. The room went still again, but this time it wasn't tense. It felt like resolution starting to take shape, because nothing was hidden anymore, nothing was unclear, everything was out in the open. And once that happens, there is only one thing left: a decision. I reached forward, took the paper back, folded it carefully, and placed it into the envelope because it had already served its purpose and didn't need to stay on the table anymore. "This house stays exactly as it is," I said, clear and final. "No changes, no transfers, and no decisions without me." Each word was deliberate because I wasn't responding anymore, I was setting direction. He didn't interrupt or push back, and he didn't try to take control of the conversation again because he couldn't. The balance had shifted, quietly but completely. He nodded once, not in agreement or acceptance, but in recognition that something had changed and it wasn't going back. I stood up slowly, not abruptly or dramatically, just done, because this part of it was over. Not everything, but the confusion, the uncertainty, and the quiet control were finished. I walked toward the hallway without looking back, not because I was avoiding anything, but because I didn't need to check anything anymore. I already knew where things stood, and more importantly, so did he. The house felt different after that, not because anything physically changed, but because something had settled. Everything felt clear and defined, with no more guessing and no more quiet decisions happening around me, just clarity. The next few days moved at a slower pace, not in a heavy way, but in a controlled way. We spoke when necessary, with short, direct conversations that carried no assumptions and no overstepping, and that alone said everything. Because sometimes change isn't loud, sometimes it shows up in what stops happening. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It wasn't filled with questions, it was filled with understanding. He moved differently now, more careful and more aware, no longer leading or deciding ahead of me, and I noticed it, not as something I needed to react to, but as something that had shifted completely. I went back into the bedroom a few days later, not for answers this time, just to stand there again. The same room, the same space, but now it didn't feel frozen anymore. It felt settled. I walked over to the dresser and opened the drawer again. The envelope was still there, exactly where I left it. I picked it up, held it for a moment, then placed it back, because I didn't need to read it again. I already understood it, what it said, what it meant, and why it mattered. It wasn't just instructions, it was trust, left in my hands. And now I had honored that, not by reacting, not by arguing, but by seeing clearly and standing where I needed to stand. I walked out of the room and closed the door behind me, not slowly, not carefully, just normally, because I wasn't holding on to the moment anymore. I had moved through it. I stepped into the living room and looked around again, the same space where everything started shifting, the same place where control quietly changed hands. But now it felt like mine again, not because someone gave it back, because I took it back by paying attention, by questioning, by not staying silent when something didn't feel right. And that mattered more than anything else. Because situations like this don't announce themselves. They build quietly, step by step, until one day you either notice or you don't. And if you don't, everything changes without you even realizing it. I stood there for a moment longer. Then I sat down in my usual chair, the same one, the one that had never moved. And for the first time since all of this started, I felt still. Not uncertain, not reactive, just clear. Because nothing had been taken from me. It had almost been, but almost isn't the same as done. And that difference is everything. I leaned back slightly and let the quiet settle around me. Not heavy, not tense, just present. Because now I understood something I hadn't seen before. Control doesn't always come with force. Sometimes it comes quietly, through decisions you weren't part of, through conversations you didn't hear, through actions that move just ahead of you. And if you're not paying attention, it keeps moving until there's nothing left for you to hold on to. But this time, I saw it. And because I saw it, I stopped it. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. And sometimes that's all it takes. But how easily it could have happened without me noticing. So let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like someone was making decisions around you without you even realizing it? And if you did notice, what did you do? Did you stay quiet or did you speak up? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if stories like this speak to you, make sure you subscribe to Quiet Voice of Her Life, because sometimes the quietest moments carry the biggest truths.